much. So we'll call our meeting to order. And first of all, just want to say I am very excited to convene the first Regional Equitable Housing Subcommittee meeting. Before we begin, can I ask Carlos on how folks can access the interpretation?
Gladly. Thank you, Chair. We'll begin with instructions in Spanish, and I will be back with the instructions in English. Muy buenas tardes. Estoy ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea para esta reunión. Para hacer uso del mismo, solo es necesario que se desplace a la barra de controles de Zoom, por lo general en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Ahí haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etcétera, presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, we do have interpretation available to and from Spanish. To use the feature, all you need to do is scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where your meeting controls are. There, click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish law in the background. Gracias, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm very excited to be here. So before we begin, I just wanted to share a couple thoughts and remarks. As I mentioned, when the board of directors approved the creation of the subcommittee, as we all know, we are in a huge housing crisis. We need to be producing hundreds of thousands of affordable homes over the next decade, but we're on track to build only 10% of what we need. And this housing shortage is driving up rents and home prices and putting an entire generation of San Diegans at risk of being left behind. This housing crisis that we are in the midst of impacts all of us, from low-income renters to retirees living on fixed incomes, from working class families locked out of homeownership, to people experiencing homelessness, to young working families trying to buy their first house. Our regional economy is also impacted as we struggle to attract and retain a talented workforce in the face of such a high cost of living. People are being forced to move farther and farther away, which exacerbates our climate crisis with longer commute times, worse traffic congestion, more carbon pollution, and the acceleration of our climate emergency. I believe our region is at a critical crossroads, and we really have three options before us. We can continue doing business as usual and watch as housing prices continue to spiral out of control. We can build the wrong housing in the wrong places, paving over our open spaces and ecosystems to build McMansions from here to Anza Borrego. This would worsen our region's traffic, commute times, fire risks, and carbon pollution. Or we can work together to incentivize new ways to build the right kind of housing in the right places. This is housing that prioritizes equity and sustainability and fits into the wide diversity of housing needs across our extremely diverse different communities. So this is what this subcommittee is all about. We are here to come up with innovative, incentive-based, and voluntary programs to scale up equitable housing production across our region. We will be considering a menu of housing solutions that can help support the work being done in all of our respective jurisdictions. So before kicking off the agenda, I'd like to offer Hassan a few minutes to also welcome us today. Hassan?
I'm sorry, I'll get it right after a couple of years here. Good afternoon, Supervisor. Thank you. Mayor Gloria, Satullah Solis, Mayor Hibner, Councilman Jack Shu. Good to see you all. Happy Lunar New Year today. So this is one of those when Supervisor Rimmer and Mayor Gloria talk about this. It's really exciting for me as a professional being in this business for a while. We always talk about how housing affordability is a challenge for Californians, future generation. And, many bills in the legislators went and gone. But we're still talking about the same problem. Affordable housing, it's not affordable, it's not within reach. Like the supervisor said, not building enough or building the wrong houses in the wrong places is a challenge. And so, we have a tremendous opportunity on Supervisor Lawson Rimmer and Mary Gloria leadership and to make a true difference, not only a policy decision when it comes to differences, but an actual practical differences, an opportunity with this 5 big moves that we could actually do something that results finally in having more supply of affordable housing in the right places. And that leads to better linkages to transportation systems. The exciting part for me is, and I appreciate the supervisor bringing this on, is we have money coming from the state through the REAP program, and we're going to have more money. I think we should devote local funding to incentivize the kind of development that we need. And just reminding you that I'm very familiar with the program in San Francisco at the MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the program they're trying to do in Los Angeles. I think this could be much better, and our region could benefit as a result. But with the supervisor and Mary Gloria, no pressure, but I'm expecting this to translate into real change when it comes to housing. And frankly, I want Sandag to have a much bigger housing program than any of our counterpart in the Bay Area, because we could incentivize housing through transportation and vice versa. And I hope that happens. So thank you, and back to you, Supervisor.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Okay, so the first item on our agenda is the charter and the membership. And I definitely like to just begin by thanking Sandag Chair Catherine Blakespear for the faith she has in me to lead the subcommittee, and I'm honored to serve as chair. I hope everyone had a chance to see the charter that was distributed. Looking at the charter, I think personally I'm very happy.
Chair, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we actually have a couple hands up from the public. If we could go back to item 2.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Let's turn back to item 2 for non-agenda public comments.
So I do see 2 hands from the public. We'll start with Lori Saldana, and after Lori will be Catherine Rhodes. Lori, you can go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for going back to public comment for this. Happy Lunar New Year to members of this committee, and I wish you success. This is a very propitious time to take on a new endeavor. So I wish you success in this new project. I know many of you. I was in the legislature as chair of housing many years ago, and unfortunately the situation has not improved despite efforts over time to build more housing for people of every need. And just today I was down at the sports arena area where the San Diego police were cleaning up an encampment of people who have no housing. Their homes are tents and shelters and vehicles parked along sports arena near the old government area where a veterans tent had been set up a few years ago for unsheltered veterans. And I went down there because I have concerns about how unsheltered people are treated. And this is an Equitable Housing Subcommittee, and I encourage you to listen to people who are being treated in very sometimes hazardous ways by our law enforcement agencies, and I hope unintentionally. But I wanted to go and witness how a cleanup would take place with people who are very vulnerable. And I was concerned by what I saw and the lack of masks on police officers and entering people's homes. And legally, those are their homes. And they were entering without permission or consent of people who appeared in some cases very sick and disoriented. So these are the symptoms of the housing shortfall that the chair referenced. They are symptoms of a chronic lack of housing for people who have income. I talked to people who said, I have $1,000 pension, I have $1,000 Social Security, but there is no place I can live in San Diego on this fixed income. So I encourage you, please, in this is becoming a humanitarian crisis. And as I've been documenting for months, the risk of dying from COVID in the unsheltered community is twice as high as people with housing. And people who have COVID and are unsheltered are many times more likely to have to be hospitalized, often at public expense. They are discharged, they have no housing for recuperation, and they are being found, their bodies are being found near medical centers since they are discharged without a home to go to. So just to put that all in perspective, this is not only a housing crisis, it is ultimately a homelessness and humanitarian crisis during COVID. And I encourage this committee to bring in people with lived experience to talk about potential solutions in the crisis we are in now, as well as long-term solutions as we move beyond the immediate pandemic effects on people's health and well-being and safety. So again, happy Lunar New Year. Thank you for starting this new and very important subcommittee, and I wish you great success with this new venture.
Thank you.
Thank
Our
you.
next-
Any more speakers?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Catherine Rhodes will be next, and she'll be our last commenter. Catherine, you can go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is Catherine Rhodes, and I'm so excited for this. This is just wonderful that you have a new subcommittee that's going to be about equitable housing. That's great. You know, I used to come to Sandag and talk about homeless and how and basically beg you guys to help on the homeless issue because we couldn't get help from the city or the county. And Sandag staff would tell me, we can't do that. We're only in charge of transportation. And I would say, no, but you know, there's 9 elements to the general plan, and you're literally in charge of all 9 elements, and that includes housing. And they would say, no, the only thing we're in charge of housing is to calculate the regional housing needs assessment. But that's not true. You have so much power. You could literally do anything that you want to do. And so this is what I would love you guys to do if possible. The County of San Diego has some Project Room Key hotel rooms for homeless who are at risk for COVID, but they're going to stop it on April 1st. It's going to be stopped, but it's probably going to get another extension. It's been extended so far for almost 2.5 years. And so what I would like is for Sandag to actually contact the County of San Diego and create your own Project Room Key program through Sandag, and then have Sandag put out the request for proposals. And what happened with the city of San Diego, they put out, the San Diego Housing Commission put out their request, but their request was for a really big program, as big as the convention center. But what I'm talking about is smaller programs, something that like Amy Zamadio could do, where she is housing a whole bunch of homeless people already, but she can't get any funding through Project Room Key. So what I would love is for you guys to set up a funding stream so that we could get that 100% reimbursable FEMA money, so that we could put everybody into hotel rooms. And then afterwards, when everything's ended, FEMA will actually give every homeless person that doesn't have a safe exit plan, they will give them a free brand new trailer or a tiny home. And then they'll allow them to buy it off the federal government at a discounted price throughout the year. And that would actually create equity for the poorest people here in San Diego. So I'm so happy that you're doing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any further comments from the public?
That concludes the public comments. Thank you.
Great. So then we will move on to the next item, which is charter and membership. Just starting with the charter, I'm personally quite happy with the charter. I think it provides us the flexibility to hear various perspectives from members that I've appointed, everyone here. I think the purpose of the subcommittee, as we see it, is consistent with what we discussed at the board when approving the creation of the subcommittee. We certainly need to be looking at innovative and incentive-based housing approaches that have a regional scope, and I think that's all captured. So I'm proud of that. I think it seems like we're all on the same page on that here. And moving on to membership, I'd like to thank all of you for volunteering to join the subcommittee. I sent the membership list to the clerk of the board, and I am very happy to see you all here today. I am sure you will all bring a huge amount of expertise and be part of great collaborative discussions as we think together about these huge challenges. I certainly would like to move on to the good stuff in terms of what we're actually going to do and hear from staff. But first, are there any public comments on this item 2? Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. I do see one hand from the public. Catherine Rhodes, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Lovely. This is Catherine Rhodes. And yes, I like the charter, but one thing that I would like you to do is actually put somewhere on there that that you're going to be doing something for homeless people, not just for, not just for other people, but specifically in your charter, put the word homeless on it. I'm trying to get my thing to, I can't now read what I was going to say, but that's basically it. Please put something related to homeless in your charter so that everybody knows that you guys are going to actually try to do something to help everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any additional public comments on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do see 2 additional hands. Lori Saldana will be next, followed by Tim Bilesh. Lori, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. So to follow up on what Catherine Rhodes said, yes, if the language is not in the what is essentially a contract of the work that you're going to perform on behalf of the residents of San Diego County, then there is no guarantee that it will be done. And so as part of your commitment to equity, I think it is absolutely important that you include people who are unsheltered in the housing plan and how housing will be designed and created and maintained for in a social housing type of program, as Catherine mentioned, the FEMA is supporting through trailers and tiny homes. And I, again, as chair of housing in the assembly, I traveled all around the state. I visited and was guested, or I was given tours of affordable housing developments, of shelters, and there is much to be learned around the state of California and beyond. And I encourage the members of this committee to expand your vision beyond the geographic boundaries of San Diego, because there are communities that have figured out some very innovative, creative, and cost-effective ways to house people that are not in congregate shelters, which increasingly are dangerous, especially with this latest variant that is highly infectious. So as part of your charter, you mentioned, and Catherine mentioned, the regional housing needs assessment is a basic requirement. There are challenges to meeting that, and that I think this committee needs to address, like short-term vacation rentals and Airbnb style housing, that again, I think you need to add, in addition to your commitment to equity, to look at barriers to housing for people who have been residents of San Diego, sometimes their entire lives. And then they get to a point where they are older, often disabled or lack mobility. They need to change their residence. And there is just no housing available for people on fixed incomes with those physical disability challenges. So as part of equity, look at the barriers people face to housing. And finally, this is also Black History Month. About 5 to 6% of our residents in San Diego identify as Black or African American, and yet over 20% of our homeless residents are in that designation. That is an inequity that needs to be addressed. That is the result of long-term and systemic discrimination for access to capital, access to investing in whether it's rental property or purchasing a home. So please take that into account, the inequities and barriers that are forcing people to live in these encampments as you work on your plan. Thank you.
Any additional comments, Francesca?
Yes, our last commenter will be Tim Bylish. Tim, you can go ahead with your comments.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate Sandag creating this type of committee and wish you well. I do not pretend to have any expertise in the housing market. I do see the people that don't have houses. I've lived in many different places. But there's one or two areas I would like Sandag and the committee to consider in placing in your charter. That's the problem of investment in housing rather than living in housing. Desirable areas like San Diego are very attractive for new construction and single person dwellings, and the migration outside of the coast to other areas may provide increasing valuations. But I think having in the charter some discussion about housing prices, affordability of loans, the expected changes in what it is going to cost of ownership for ownered housing, and how it's driving up rental properties, the economics of housing, because it is such a fueling apparently of the economy, perhaps could be included in the charter, because when downturns come, particularly in sale prices of homes or inability to provide mortgages, that would be a future problem developing, and other areas historically have demonstrated that. So please consider the economics of housing as well as the social needs of individuals, foreign investment, the immigration issues in terms of their needs to buy housing or rental, and include these in your charter. Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that concludes the commenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just want to make a couple clarifying remarks. First of all, any changes or amendments to the charter would actually have to go to the full board. That's not something we could act on today. So I do think, just in response to some of the input from the public, my reading of the charter is very clearly certainly does encompass and include homelessness, and will allow us to act on homelessness, and absolutely includes kind of thinking about innovative solutions around housing affordability and loan programs. So I think we have a great charter that's broad enough and all-encompassing enough to give us the scope to do this work. But in any case, we would not be able to make those changes today. That would have to go to the board of directors. Not something the subcommittee could act on. So any member comments before we move on? Does Mayor Gloria have anything to add to kick us off?
Well, it's very kind, Chair. And thank you for including me in this effort. I'm pleased to be here to work with regional leaders to address what I hear is the biggest issue that are on people's minds, whether it's the homelessness crisis, the housing affordability crisis. People want to see action on this issue. And as I look at my colleagues who are here today, I know all of you feel the same way. And Chair, it's exactly as you set it up. We want the right kind of housing, the right locations. It's not about building anything anywhere, but making sure that we as a region are tackling this. And we're trying to do what we can at the city level. I love the partnership of Sandag, the county, and the other agencies who are here. And I think that this charter does sufficiently address what I think the board wanted when authorizing this, as well as giving us a broad enough mandate to be able to bring back stuff that I think is meaningful, is tangible, is implementable, and hopefully allow us to drive some change on this issue that, again, in the middle of a pandemic and economic challenging times, this is what folks talk to me the most about. I'm grateful that Sandag would add this to our work plan. It signifies to me that Sandag understands that we represent the entire region and we need to take action. And again, Chair, thanks for taking this on. This really started with your idea. And I'm just grateful to give some of my time to help further it. Look forward to doing whatever. I believe this is informational item, so I don't believe any action is needed at this time. But definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here and work with you on housing issues on a regional basis.
Thank you, Mayor Gloria. Appreciate your leadership across the board in so many ways. Any other member comments before we move on to the Housing Acceleration Program? Great. Okay. Let's move on to item number 4, which is Sandag's Housing Acceleration Program, which is we're going to be looking at an overview of the goals and current planning efforts underway for the Sandag's existing Housing Acceleration Program. Tuari?
Yes, thank you so much, and good morning, Supervisor and Chair Lawson Reamer, as well as Vice Chair Gloria, and all of the members of the subcommittee. For those who don't know me, I am Tuari Fawola. I'm a Principal Regional Planner here at Sandag, and I manage our Sustainable Communities team. And really, really excited and happy to be here with you this afternoon to give you an overview of Sandag's Housing Acceleration Program, and hearing all of the comments that started off this meeting. Really just shows the importance of this work and Sandag's role, stepping into a role as really a regional leader for housing. So next slide, please. So I think our chair, our vice chair, and a lot of the comments that were made at the beginning of the meeting really echo all of the reasons that we need this subcommittee and the importance of the work ahead. But what I would like to highlight is just some facts and give some visual representation to some of the reason why we want to emphasize the work. And so the graph that you can see here on the left, it is a visual of our region's growth since the 1950s. The blue line is the region's population, and the orange line is our housing production. And as you can see from this chart, housing production has just simply not kept up with our growing population. And then the graph there on the right shows new building permits that were issued in the San Diego region. This is spanning between 1970 and 2017. And the region's annual production of housing units, it's actually declined significantly, resulting in a 54,000 unit shortfall, leaving us with a need of approximately 12,000 units annually just to keep up with our population growth. And now that we've had, I think, a lot of discussion around kicking off this meeting for the need, I wanted to share with you just some of the data behind the importance of us taking on this issue. I really want to take the rest of the time to just kind of dive into the specifics about what we've started doing at Sandag for our housing program, and then really lay out a timeline for you. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as it's been said, Sandag has been involved in housing matters for many years, maybe not to the extent that we hope to be now, but we certainly understand the need to consider housing and transportation planning together. It's something that we have captured in our regional plan, as well as we're starting to see the availability of state funds that have really brought us to where we're at today. And this is really where we hope the subcommittee will play an important role in shaping how Sandag's housing role looks for the future. And I've highlighted a few milestones over the last 2 years here on this slide. The boxes in purple are highlighting those state programs and the funding that's being given to our region. And then the boxes in blue show some of the board actions that have been taken place over the last 2 years related to housing. And so when you start looking from left to right, back in July of 2020, when the Sandag board adopted our 6th cycle regional housing needs assessment plan, that same year, the state actually allocated the regional early action planning grant funds to MPOs to develop programs that accelerate housing production in alignment with our regional plans and sustainable community strategy. And some of you probably heard our CEOs mention this as REAP funds. You may hear me occasionally say REAP funds or others, but it is the regional early action planning grant funds that the state allocated. And then when we move into 2021, the board authorized, actually just not that long ago, the release of our 1st cycle of grant funds for our housing acceleration program. And this was done in conjunction with our already existing program for Transnet Smart Growth Incentive. And so that was a total of $6 million that we released between the 2 programs to really provide planning support to our local jurisdictions. And the Housing Acceleration Grant Program, we were able to do that because of the funds that we were able to receive from the state. And I know that this group is also very keenly familiar with the milestone and that we had in 2021 for our region when our board adopted our 2021 regional plan, and then shortly thereafter established this housing subcommittee. And lastly, something that we hope to talk about in future meetings, and I've talked about just now with the state funds that were received earlier, is the REAP funding. And we anticipate the state is actually doing a second round of REAP funding. We anticipate our next round of funding to approximately be 43 million. And we are super, super excited about this opportunity and what this will do for our program. And one of the things that we're looking forward to in terms of regional collaboration is being able to put some of that funding into the hands of our local jurisdictions to help them to achieve some of the goals that we need to do related to housing. Next slide. So as I continue to keep mentioning RHNA, our Regional Housing Needs Assessment, this has been Sandag's historical role as a council of governments, is to develop the RHNA plan and the methodology that goes behind it. And as a result of that plan being approved by a board, now all of our local jurisdictions have adopted or are currently adopting their housing elements, and they're beginning to implement them for the 6th cycle. RHNA, we needed to produce, or the number of units that we have for the San Diego region was over 171,000. And that is to be done between the years of 2021 and 2029. And the 5 boxes that you see on this slide are really just highlighting some of the objectives that are within our RHNA plan and are reflective of what we believe is the purpose and the formation of this subcommittee, and a lot of the comments that we've been hearing today, about equitable housing, the distribution of that, and really promoting how we can do more infill development, the right housing in the right places. And then in addition to the housing program, at Sandag is focused on achieving these objectives. And we really want to make sure that as we're working through this, that we're working with the local jurisdictions, because it's important for them to be able to implement their housing elements. Next slide. So the regional plan. The regional plan is another very important document that helps to guide some of the work that we do with our housing program. Our regional plan includes a sustainable community strategy, SCS, as you'll hear often us refer to it. But the SCS in the regional plan calls for a land use pattern that is driven by regional goals for sustainability, mobility, housing affordability, and economic prosperity. And the sustainable community strategy is required to accommodate those RHNA allocation numbers, as well as to reach and meet and show that we're able to do those greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And there are different strategies within our regional plan that really support the work that we're here to talk about today, like our mobility hub strategy. That's part of the 5 big moves. And the mobility hubs within the 5 big moves, it really focuses on housing and job growth in urban areas where there's existing or planned infrastructure. And so that's something that we think is very important to draw that correlation between that work that's already been accepted and adopted by our board and the work that we're continuing to do moving forward. And so the regional plan, as well as the regional housing needs assessment, they're really both very important documents as we're in the midst of a new era for housing in California. Both of these documents will help us and serve as our guide for how we develop the housing acceleration program here at Sandag, as well as helping our local jurisdictions as they're meeting, their own requirements and really fostering collaboration amongst the jurisdictions as we work towards regional housing solutions. Next slide. So when we introduced the housing program, we introduced it actually last year to our regional planning committee, as well as to the board of directors in November and December of 2021. And we started to outline some of the ways that we saw Sandag's role as a housing leader. And as part of the planning process, we went through a series of interviews that we conducted with staff at our local jurisdictions to understand both the barriers as well as the opportunities that jurisdictions face when they're trying to advance housing initiatives. And so we took all of the input that we received from our local jurisdictions to really inform the way that Sandag has started to identify opportunities to best facilitate the implementation of our housing program across the region. And I've kind of highlighted 3 work areas here on the screen that we feel that this work could fall into. One of it is certainly local jurisdiction support. I mentioned the grant program that we have through the Housing Acceleration Program that we just released last November. So that's one way that we can support local jurisdictions. There's other ways that we think we could support local jurisdictions through other technical assistance. It can be anything from helping them to streamline their processes and procedures for how they issue grant permits, to really focusing on education and outreach at the local level. And then we did take very data-driven approach when we developed our 2021 regional plan. And we want to do the same thing as we're working towards our housing program. We want to really equip the region with the appropriate data and tools that they need to help us all move towards our housing solution. So really looking at different tools and providing that data analysis, we think is an important role that Sandag could play. And then the last thing that you see there on the slide is really related to regional initiatives. And this is allowing us to engage with the local communities, such as activities as a Housing Policy Leadership Academy, or developing a vision for sustainable growth by exploring and studying financial models. How do we start to generate revenues? How do we distribute funds to make sure that we're able to accelerate the production of housing in the San Diego region? Next slide. So I do want to put a plug in here because I did mention, some of those regional initiatives, and Sandag has already started on some of that right now. And we've already kicked off one of those by starting to plan for, and it's coming up on February 15th, a housing policy forum. And this is a free event open for anyone to attend. It's virtual, so it's online, and you can, log in and join us. But we certainly want to make sure that we're opening up this opportunity for everyone to really understand the importance of housing and where we're at from a legislative perspective and the urgency behind it. We're also putting on in March a Housing Policy Leadership Academy. And so the applications for those who are interested and want to apply, that is open, and the first session for that will begin in March. And so we're really excited about both of these opportunities. It's really a good opportunity for us to get a big cross-section of all of the stakeholders that we want to work with and have interest in accelerating housing production. And so we're really excited to have this happening. And actually, I believe Mayor Sotelo Solis is a graduate of the program, and I'm sure could speak to the content and value more than I could. Next slide. So an area that we're looking forward also to working with the subcommittee on, and I'll talk a little bit about it now, and certainly our next item we could dig in a bit more, but is a framework for equitable housing that will help to define the priorities as well as our path forward for the region. And so I have suggested to others when I talk about this to think of it as an action plan for how Sandag will prioritize our efforts for accelerating housing in the San Diego region. And we propose that the framework is really developed around these 5 Ps for housing that you see here on the screen. These are policy goal areas that align with the state's approach to the housing crisis. It also aligns with our RENA plan that I talked about earlier, our regional plan, and we believe that will help local jurisdictions and supporting them on their housing elements. And so the 5 Ps, as you can see here, are about producing housing for all, really setting forth the standards for zoning that allow for a variety of housing types to be developed, looking at all income needs, and then preserving vulnerable housing, really looking at units that are at risk of losing affordability and discussing the cost to preserve or replace, promoting equity, inclusion, and sustainability. This is really an intentional focus on dismantling the structural and systemic barriers that have prevented that promise of opportunity from everyone being able to achieve housing in our region. And then protecting our tenants. We've heard, and I think we heard through some of the comments today, the importance of housing stability and protecting tenants, so really placing an emphasis on that. And then preventing displacement. So Sandag looking at opportunities at how we can give regional guidance or policies to put in place that help to prevent displacement. And so this is an area that we are really hoping to explore with the subcommittee more as part of your work plan, and happy to discuss it more through item 5, but that concludes my presentation. So I will turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Francesca, any public comments before we move on to member comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are 2 hands. We'll start with Lori Saldana, who will be followed by Catherine Rhodes. Lori, you can go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge Catherine Rhodes, who does a lot of good analysis of existing funds that can be used for many of these programs. I want to encourage this working group or the subcommittee to reach out to non-traditional developers for housing. And in the faith community, there are many churches. I've spoken with some boards on churches that have a good amount of property adjacent to their church. They would like to add housing, but it's not a big project. It's maybe only 10 units of on-site housing for an affordable home for people, and they cannot find funding. they're too small. But those are the infill types of projects where there's nearby support for people who are dealing with substance abuse and behavioral health. They have a church nearby for support. And yet the church is being told there's no funding available to support your proposal for a 10-unit on-site affordable housing project. I think that's a real oversight for a few reasons. The most vulnerable people who could really benefit from that type of housing are being left behind in the current framework. And infill is going to be the way we provide a lot more housing without having to sprawl and put a burden on transportation. So please, and the same is true for our schools and our school districts. Many of them have a lot of property that could be used for a multi-purpose approach to staff housing, teacher housing, and please encourage some type of research on doing that in San Diego, where people want to stay close to where they work, and that will be infill. In addition to the density of smaller spaces being filled in with smaller units for people who don't need a larger home. So, and finally, the most cost-effective approach to this is definitely to stop the displacements and maintain existing housing and rehabilitate it as necessary. There are good federal funds for that, but the least expensive housing is what's already been built and simply needs to be maintained and improved or remodeled and additional density added, whether that's ADUs or other ways that can be converted from a larger home into maybe 2 smaller homes on the same footprint. So thank you for considering this. And as you work, especially on the grants, please look for those smaller developers that have the land, would like to build something, but don't fit in the model of very large developments. And they're being left behind, and that's a real missed opportunity for this region. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, you can go ahead next with your comments.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to say something that Lori Saldana was saying. So anyway, Monica Ball in San Diego created the YIGBY, Yes in God's Backyard, which says that you can build affordable housing in the parking lots of churches. And she got the law changed just for San Diego. And then other people wanted to do it, so it became a state law. So now churches, if they want to build affordable housing on their church parking lot, and the reason why is because all the municipal codes required the churches to have tons and tons of parking. And of course, it's filled on Sunday, but most of the time, the parking lots are empty. And so the new state law says that churches, through the YIGBY program, can put affordable housing in their parking lots, and they don't have to create new parking spaces. They could just get rid of it and not be in violation of the municipal code. So that's a really great program, but I don't think it's even been used once in San Diego, even though it was, the law was created in San Diego. And again, that's because small people don't get the money. You're looking for big projects. And if you could make sure that your funding, could go for small projects, specifically housing for the homeless, where, they could get a hotel for 30 people. They literally have hotels that will house the homeless. They just need funding and they can't get it. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is that in your regional housing needs determination, you said that the replacement adjustment was only 0.5%. The replacement adjustment is the amount of units demolished or not available to people, existing units. And for example, that would include the units that are the short-term rentals that are now being taken out of the housing stock. And so altogether, you said in the next 10 years, there's only going to be 6,255 units that are going to be demolished or not available for housing. I think that should be, be up to 5%, not just a 0.5%. And so that's just one thing. And then also a lot of your numbers, you always get the numbers from the city, but I very much think that a lot of times when you get numbers of how many units they actually did, they double count it. They'll count it in one year and then they'll count it in the other. So the way to get around that is actually say, for whatever units they have, put down the assessor parcel number, put down the address, and then put down the units. That way they can't double count the units. And then they also never talk about the 10,000 affordable housing SROs that were destroyed in downtown San Diego and not replaced.
Thank you, Catherine. Chair, that does conclude the public comments.
Oh, thank you so much. And do we have any member comments on this item? I see one hand up, Mayor Huebner.
Yeah, quick question for Tuari, and thanks for that presentation. Are these REAP grants, are they only for planning or are they for subsidy as well?
So the REAP dollars, we have the two different grant programs through it. The REAP 1 funding, that is for planning dollars, but then the REAP 2 can be used for the 43 million. It can be used for planning or infrastructure, i.e. capital.
And that starts this year.
Yes, we will be bringing an item actually to the board through a resolution, similar how we did before, just asking for permission to pursue the application with the state to receive the funds.
Okay, and then one other question I just remembered is the population, one of the first slides. I recall that the population was changed kind of during the RENA process. It was before I was back on the board. So I'm gathering that this is the accurate new updated population growth, which was less than was anticipated during the RENA.
Well, yes, less than, we've since changed the population growth forecast, which is also reflected. I know it was after the RENA, but it's reflected in our regional plan with the new DOF forecast, Department of Finance forecast.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand from Mayor Sotelo-Solis.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I am very excited to be on this committee. I just have to say, these are all things that all of us have spoken about either in person to each other or our colleagues or our work staff. And Tuari, I am very excited to be working closer with you. Yes, I did do the classes and it was amazing. I would invite all elected officials to do the sessions on housing and but to that end, I just want to say that as we discuss any of these elements, and I believe we might have more tangibles in item 5, but I think each one should have very specifically laid out what does a city need to do in order to be eligible for this resource, like spell it out for people where it's super easy, one sentence. You must have a resolution 6 months in advance to be eligible. You have to have matching funds of $1 million in your general fund to match, or you have to dedicate a staff person to, do XYZ. I think if we're that specific, I don't know that any other entity is doing that. It may just take a little bit more and really putting it out and making it super simple. And I think that would help the ones that are willing and able to say, let's go forth, let's do this. But also too, it may shine the light for those that are thinking, well, I can't do this. I'm not eligible. I don't have these resources. And if there is somewhere where our staff or the resources, whether it be a REAP grant or other, can help them meet that need, we don't want to hear, no, I can't. No, this is not eligible. No, I can't. No, we want to get to a yes, and however we can get there, but sometimes just writing it out specifically what is all of that is needed, and also to just the potential external costs. So I'm here to support you in whatever manner that is. Chair already knows this, so I think again, just getting more details the better, but onward. And I think I look forward to item 5, because I think anytime we have a work plan so we can actually start checking off those boxes and really get information out to the community and our colleagues first and foremost, I think is essential. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shu.
Sure. I just wanted to follow Mayor Sotelo-Solis's point with regards to having some criteria to incentivize our cities to move forward. So I'm speaking of maybe overall policies, as she has mentioned, also inclusionary housing policies that cities can start adopting. And I think that's something that I'm just learning about. But I think there's a lot of room for us to start incentivizing cities to do that. We talked about working with our transportation plans. And maybe there are some areas that we can work on that as well. So just in my short year, this last year, I just learned of how we have what we call TOD development, transit-oriented development, without us really measuring how much people from that development take transit, nor are there any real incentives for these developers who are getting public assistance and sometimes on building on public land, any real incentive for them to reduce the cost of transportation and incentivize that. So I hope we can start working on a laundry list of things that we could include and help our cities, all of our cities, move in this direction of really providing equitable housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I actually have a follow-up question building on the comments of my two colleagues on the question of criteria. Tori, what are the next steps and kind of coming back with a framework for how that 43 million will be allocated? Just if you could outline sort of the process for that developing and approving that criteria.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And you know, maybe we should have made this all one big item, because we're talking a little bit about what we want to talk with you in item 5 for our work plan, but specifically to the REAP funds and how the 43 million would be allocated. You know, part of what the state expects us to do with those funds is really, you know, some of it is robust outreach and education, because they recognize that some of the barriers behind moving things forward is that there's not enough education for people to know exactly, like Mayor Alejandro was talking about, how do people know, make it simple for them so that they can get into these programs, they can get the funding and get projects built. But so there's a portion of the funds that the state expects us to do for that. The other part is really what we're hoping to engage actually with the subcommittee, working with the local jurisdictions and bringing on stakeholders to really help us flesh out that program, to say what are the priorities for our region that we want to use to implement, to use those funds for implementing, for putting the money into the hands of jurisdictions, for using it for other purposes related to the work plan we'll discuss next, or for continuing programs like we did with the housing acceleration one, where we release grant funds. And so I'd say through in item 5, we're going to talk about the work plan of this subcommittee. And one of those is setting the stage and talking about the equitable housing framework, that kind of action plan that I mentioned that talks how we want Sandag to be a regional housing leader. We're hoping through this subcommittee's input into that framework, some of that will then be able to transfer over into our application to the state to let them know what we think would work best for the San Diego region. And just, you know, sorry to I'm going to close after I make this last comment, but one of the things that was quite different about the second round of funding compared to the first round of funding was planning specific, and it was very, very focused on housing. The second round of funding that the state is giving us is really looking at that comprehensive look of how do we look at our climate goals, how do we look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and vehicles miles traveled, along with accelerating the production of housing. So it's really bringing those two together. And that's what we want to work with this subcommittee on, for developing that equitable housing framework, prioritizing the work of Sandag, and then reflecting that into our application to the state for the funds.
Thank you so much. So it sounds like this is a good segue into our next item on our work plan. So thank you very much. Moving on to our next item. Tori, are you also doing our work plan presentation?
Me again. So you guys just get a lot of me today. So Kendall, you can go ahead and go to the first slide on that one. Go ahead and skip to the next one. So we've talked a lot about, I think, kind of leading into this, so we'll just jump right in. So this is when, you know, staff, as I said, we did do a series of, you know, informational interviews with the local jurisdictions, you know, last year during the summer, to really understand what are some of the needs, and really looking at best practices around the region. And these 3 areas are what we as staff are proposing that we think would make sense for a focus of this subcommittee to help move us forward in some of those regional goals. And this is a discussion item, so we're here to talk to you about our ideas and really hear back from you what you think should be integrated into your work plan. But the first one, I did speak to you about the first one you see there, the Regional Equitable Housing Framework. Again, think of this as like an action plan that's really going to set the stage for how Sandag is going to move forward as a regional leader and give guidance on the type of work that we need to be doing to support our local jurisdictions and to support the housing crisis within our region as a whole. And our goal with this particular item that we want to work with the subcommittee on is that as we work through this and we develop that framework, is something that we could take to the Sandag Board of Directors via a recommendation from the subcommittee to then really lay as kind of, solidifying our regional role. The other opportunity that we see as far as a work plan is really how we could explore potential revenue opportunities that accelerate housing production. There are existing funding programs, and I know some of the callers who, some of the public who've commented on this, there are existing programs out there at the state level and others, but those funds have certainly been limited. We have not had a lot of success in some of those state funding programs in the San Diego region and being able to actually get the funding to come to our region to accelerate housing production. And so we really want to explore different revenue opportunities. And then the last one on this slide is really exploring financing mechanisms for housing, such as a regional housing finance authority. This is, a mechanism for generating revenues as well as allocating the funds to projects and different initiatives. And so, really, this is where we see that we could use the subcommittee's, regional leadership and support and working with staff as well as stakeholders throughout this process to inform the work that we're doing. And, I heard it on the calls, and I think I've heard it through some of the members of this subcommittee. We do intend to bring into the work a set of stakeholders that could help work with us, advise us and bring different knowledge and expertise to these areas so that we're not just developing this in a silo. So we really do believe that this is an opportunity for us to bring different stakeholders to the table from either the policy-driven initiatives that we're focused on, as well as some of the revenue and financing options that we're looking at for housing. Next slide. And, some of the things that we were talking about, and, our CEO Hassan mentioned this at the very beginning during his opening remarks, is that there are, examples of this and best practices within the state of California when it comes to particularly the Housing Finance Authority. Both the Bay Area as well as Los Angeles have examples of having, gone through the process of this. The Bay Area's, it has been successful in establishing their finance authority. It's called the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, or BAFA, as people tend to call it. And, Los Angeles is still actually working through establishing theirs. And one little thing that I will note as, a good best practice, and staff is happy to bring more information back to the subcommittee on these two best practice examples, is that, the Bay Area's authority, BAFA, it was also, not only was it successful in setting up, but they also were recently awarded one-time funding of $20 million in the FY 21-22 state budget for startup costs. So there's examples I think that we could look at, and how, our CEO said we could do it even better here in San Diego, but we just wanted to highlight that the things that we're pointing out have been done, and there's good best practice for us to follow. And next slide. And then, when it comes to revenues, there are a large menu of options that we can look at. And these are just a few possible revenue options listed here on this slide. And we would love the opportunity to work with the subcommittee more, bring back more information on all of the things that you see listed here, or different ideas that come up through discussions with stakeholders of the subcommittee all along the way, so that you can really weigh in and help guide what solutions you think might work best for the San Diego region. So I have a very short presentation for this one. That concludes my final thoughts on that, but we just wanted to start to bring to the conversation some of the ideas that staff has and that we've been talking about, when we come to the board or to the regional planning committee and looking at our work plan that we hope the subcommittee can help inform. So Chair, I'll now turn it back over to you for discussion, question, or comments.
Fantastic. That was really excellent. So can I just take the chair's prerogative to summarize what I think I hear you saying and make sure I'm clear, and then go to public comment and then member comment. So Tori, as I sort of understand the work plan is basically, number one, we're going to be working on is basically the things that Mayor Sotelo Solis and Councilmember Shu identified, right? Which is from the get-go, what are the criteria for how we allocate that $43 million? You know, what are those rules and how do we sort of distribute those funds? That's in your first bucket. And then you had a second bucket about revenue options. I think that's obviously, you know, very, very critical. We can't do anything without resources. So looking at how we chase down state money. I know that the governor has a lot of funds in his budget. How do we look at local revenue options? That seems like our second piece of the puzzle. And the third piece of the puzzle is this sort of broader idea you mentioned of some sort of housing finance authority, which would be like a longer term initiative on how we would sort of set policy and raise resources in a more sustained long-term way around housing sort of across the gamut. Does that capture what sort of put out what you're thinking and what the staff is proposing?
Yes, perfect. You did it more succinctly than I did. So, yes.
And no PowerPoint. Thank you so much. So do we have any, Francesca, do we have any public comment?
We do. Thank you, Chair. Catherine Rhodes will be up first, followed by Lori Saldana. Catherine, you can go ahead whenever you're ready. Catherine, you're self-muted at the moment.
Thank you. Hello, this is Catherine Rhodes, and thank you for these presentations. I was wondering if you could put both the presentations for item 4 and 5 online so that we have them. And then I just wanted to mention, you know, great opportunities. You guys could literally apply for the FEMA funding for Project Rumkey hotel rooms. That would be wonderful. You literally can apply for that money so we could get it into San Diego. The other thing that you guys could apply for is the Project Home Key funds. Those are the funds where you can buy where the state gives you the money to buy hotels for the homeless. You could actually apply for these funds all by yourself. And so I would ask you to do that. One thing in San Diego that's really good that the state does is when cities get money from the Homeless Emergency Aid Program or HEAP funds, they require local governments to declare emergency shelter crisis. And because of that emergency shelter crisis, everybody basically has a blank check to do literally anything they want to for the homeless. You know, you can put homeless on any piece of public property, and the great thing about it is that it's exempt from CEQA, so there's no public hearings. The only public hearing probably would be to you know, give money to for the program, and so you know, so that's a great thing. And then also I wanted to kind of tell you about the Neil Good Day Center. The Neil Good Day Center over on Caltrans land, that was a pilot project for homeless people, so that people could, so that Caltrans land that's not being used can be used for the poor on a temporary basis, and it's only called air rights. And so I would ask that you look at Caltrans sites where you can use some of your money and build things for the homeless. And, you know, one place that I think would be a really good location to put housing on is near the Interstate 15 by Miramar. There's a whole bunch of land. If you look where the Caltrans fences are, there's big, huge, giant swaths of land that's just sitting there unused that could be used. So please use that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next will be Lori Saldana, who will be followed by Sandy Myskowski. Lori, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. And I was hoping that Catherine was going to bring up the successor agency funds that are left over from the prior redevelopment program, when we had a redevelopment agency and Funds were going in as a tax assessment to the Center City Corporation, which then became a different agency. There are, as Catherine has reported at other meetings, quite a bit of funding, both at the county and the city level, that I think would be good seed money to create a regional housing trust fund. And many other communities, when I was visiting San Jose, for example, they use those funds to build multifamily affordable housing in the city center. And they had many very attractive and LEED certified projects that were part of their redevelopment agency. San Diego went a very different direction. And as Catherine mentioned, we wound up losing, in fact, housing in the downtown area of San Diego. And a lot of the single resident occupied buildings were converted to very upscale, expensive condos that are investments, as someone earlier mentioned. We're seen as a good second home for many people who are investing in housing as a commodity instead of someplace to live. And so the successor agency that still has, I believe, hundreds of millions of dollars in these funds at the county and the city level could be used for the purpose it was intended, which was redevelopment, including affordable housing. There was actually a requirement of a percentage of that funding go strictly to affordable housing. So I encourage you to look at existing funds that are sitting on the books and do a search and find money that's already there, that's not being put to good use. Use that to create a housing loan program or a regional housing trust fund. And I would encourage you to avoid public-private partnerships. In my experience, it is often the public that takes on the risk and the costs. We see that even in downtown San Diego now, where there are some public-private partnerships, and some of their contract agreements are not being met without quite a bit of effort on the part of the city to get them to meet their requirements. So please look into the successor agency funding. Get an accounting of that at both the county level and the city of San Diego level, and use those to create a trust fund and some type of a revolving home loan program. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final commenter is Sandy Myskowski. You can go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Sandy Myskowski. I feel really excited about this committee, housing concerns directly. Lori Saldana brought up a lot of things that I wanted to bring up, so I won't overlap on that much. But in regards to, for example, creating like a housing finance authority, I'm asking that you guys also take into account and include people with lived experience in poverty and homelessness. I, for example, have lived homelessness experience here in San Diego after I became too disabled to maintain enough income and maintain housing. And that's a common problem. We know that's a common problem in our overpriced city. So I'm asking that as you guys go forward with this work plan, please include people with lived experience in poverty, inequity, and homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes the public commenters.
Thank you so much. I'd like to see if we have any member comments on the work plan that has been outlined. Mayor Gloria.
Thank you, Chair. Just maybe a couple quick questions. I think maybe picking up where some of the public commenters just left off, in terms of opportunities for community stakeholder input, can maybe staff walk us through maybe the vision for that and who you currently have targeted for inclusion and maybe where we might provide some additional direction?
Yeah, and you know, I might have to have my staff refresh my memory or give me some of the list of names, but really we're looking at, you know, two kind of tracks of what we think we need to help us with this work plan that we put forward. One that's very, you know, track of stakeholders that would be focused on more of the policy areas, the things that we need to do to support putting forth either technical assistance or giving guidance from a regional perspective, and then the other from the revenue and the finance. And so we see the type of broader stakeholders that could be included, from housing advocates to certainly, I think we want to include people who have the lived experience and bring that perspective to the table, looking at labor, talking with, builders themselves. And so really anyone who we think is part of the equation and helping to move housing forward is who we want to engage with in those groups to bring to the discussion when we start talking about policy and revenues and financing. So we have a staff kind of a list that we've been working on. I don't have that unfortunately right in front of me at the moment, but just to give you an idea of some of the industry that we're considering.
I appreciate the expanding on the specialties or the technical expertise that's necessary here. I mean, these often, particularly for highly subsidized, very low income, social housing, public housing, typically involves very complicated financial transactions, lots of land use consulting, things of that nature that this group would want to benefit from those folks to really understand, what is it going to take to get a project from a no to a yes, right? And how can we maybe make a template that makes that work perhaps even easier in smaller communities that maybe aren't as enriched as the city of San Diego, but still want to do their part towards a regional solution. So I get that. I remind the public, these meetings, and Chair can correct me if I'm wrong, will continue to be open to the public, accessible. And this would be a place for additional stakeholder input. As this afternoon, every item has an opportunity for public comment, and we'll continue to invite that public participation. But in terms of those deliverables, we're going to be looking for a lot of technical expertise on best practices that can be less about talking, more about actually putting roofs over people's heads, right? And maybe to that point, recognizing that we are ultimately accountable to the board of Sandag. You talk more, because when looking at the work plan, I see us working through this calendar year. So at the end of the calendar year, which may be the end of this committee, is that fair to say, or is that something that's not necessarily known at this point?
Yeah, and legal can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe basically the way that we structured the charter is that upon conclusion of the deliverables that we solidify in our work plan, that would conclude this subcommittee. However, if we, I'm sure if there are changes to the work plan that go beyond what staff's anticipated timeline that we are envisioning, we put forward potential, that this could work we think could be continued until the end of this year. But if it were to change, I'm sure then we'd have the ability to do so with the way that our charter is currently structured.
Certainly the board would always have, I see legal counsel has appeared and the mic is off. So let's always defer to billable hours. Tell me what's on your mind, Betsy.
I think Tori stated it very well. There's no finite time when the subcommittee will come to end. It's whenever the objectives within the charter are achieved. And so when the subcommittee makes its recommendation as to the framework, the financing structure, and revenue structure. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
We like flexibility. So in terms of that deliverable, can you talk a bit more? I think you respond a little bit to the chair in this regard, but in terms of making sure that we're meeting our responsibilities to the board, what do you foresee us being able to deliver such that we can understand that we're staying on track?
Yeah, so, for the 3 items that we highlighted in the work plan, one, the framework, we see that actually as like a physical document that would have actions and recommendations that we could take forward to the board of directors as, this subcommittee's recommendation for solidifying Sandag's role on how we're going to achieve equitable housing within our region. And so that's one deliverable that we see. And then in terms of the revenues or the financing, authority, we see that in the form of, certainly we as staff need to bring to the subcommittee the right people, the experts, and I think materials that you need to help inform any decisions. But we see the deliverable in that really being a solid recommendation, or a recommendation, I should say, that we could take then to the board of directors with the subcommittee's support for action that would direct staff on whether or not we want to move forward with any potential revenue opportunities that would help housing in the San Diego region, or whether the recommendation for the finance authority, something that this subcommittee would bring forward to the board of directors as a recommendation that Sandag would pursue legislation or whatever it would take to allow us to have the formation of a regional housing authority for the San Diego region.
And forgive me, you were extremely clear in the presentation in terms of those 3 things, but understanding what they are in terms of the form of a written report and the form of a recommendation for a funding, to understanding what that looks like. And helping me gauge how that might pass or not the board. The last thing, well, and then to maybe tie the previous question with the one I just asked, of understanding the board has the flexibility to continue to allow this group to continue to work or to transform into something that is more specific as a standing committee, as a component unit or jurisdiction of the board itself, what have you. We have the ability to morph into something even more substantial if that's the board's desire, wisdom, etc. Last thing I would say is that slide that I was on the bill for the Bay Area and for LA captured my attention. I believe I voted on both those bills when I was in the state legislature. I never ever like it when LA and San Francisco get something that San Diego doesn't. So that certainly stands out to me as something worthy of follow-up and recognizing the legislative process for what it is. Be curious what our government affairs staff has done. Obviously, I think it sounds like this group would need to make a recommendation, but hoping that government affairs is tracking that as an item for potential sponsorship, identifying an author, is that an introduction this year? Is that an introduction in a future year, et cetera? But knowing the constraints of that process, I don't want LA and San Francisco getting something San Diego's not getting. You catch my drift. I'm very competitive that way. And I think that's immediately, Madam Chair, the value of this group is helping to make sure we're asserting ourselves the way other regions are asserting themselves. Colleen, you appeared on my screen. I'm thinking you might be willing to add something to this discussion.
Just that we're, Mayor and Supervisor Lawson Reamer, we're absolutely in alignment with you, and what comes out of this group is going to help us build our legislative program. So definitely tracking all of this, and we think it's a great opportunity for the region. There's a lot of money coming from the state. We need to absolutely make the most of it.
Wonderful. Chair, I see this is noticed as a discussion item. Do you need a motion to accept or to ratify this work plan?
Let me ask council, do we need to accept or ratify, or is this just for public discussion?
If you would like to entertain that sort of motion, you could.
Okay, great.
Let's make it official.
I would love to make it official. That would be great. Right. So is that a motion?
I'd move that we accept the draft work plan and look forward to executing it over the next calendar year.
Fantastic. I would second that motion, but first, we definitely still have a couple member comments. I think I think I saw Mayor Huebner's hand up.
Yes, my hand is up. Thank you so much, Chair. A couple of things. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive report. I'm looking forward to working on all of these aspects. A couple of things that would help me in understanding some of the barriers that we've seen in our region and throughout the state is understanding the whole complicated financing mechanism that goes behind, funding these affordable housing projects. It's not just one source that funds each of these projects. It's many of them, and they include mysterious things to me, and I would like to understand that a lot better. That would help. Also, I'm really glad to hear the REAPs. I thought it was just that the state had the criteria. If we have any way to create that criteria, I mean, that is awesome. And I would like to just mention to please recognize the differences in land value throughout the county. I know we in Solana Beach have very high land value along with other coastal cities, and we have lost a project because of each unit supposedly being too expensive. And yet we still would want this project desperately. And then in terms of inclusionary policy, Solana Beach has an inclusionary policy. We have a very small exception for an in lieu fee. But one of our projects that had was told to do a unit, an actual unit in the city. And recall our city is like as big as some neighborhoods in San Diego or small. And he had a difficult time finding something. We're 53% multifamily in Solana Beach. And so he was looking at condos, and many times the homeowner's fee kicked it out of the affordability criteria. And I'd like to talk a little bit of, explore that a little bit. But one of the ideas he came up with quite creatively, I think, was to take the cost of that unit that he would purchase. What about putting that money into a fund that we could then give to, let's say, because in this case it was over $1 million, would provide a couple $100,000 or $100,000 to individuals who would like to build homeowners associations homeowners who would like to build an ADU, and then that would help them to be able to deed restrict it to affordable. My understanding is that HCD does not look kindly upon those types of things. So it's a creative idea, and I thought it would really help to get actual units rather than just one somewhere in our city, but maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 10. And so looking at some things like that and maybe putting a little pressure on the powers that be up in the state about being a little bit more creative.
Thank you so much. Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Thank you so much. My question is kind of leading to the measurable outcomes. I love the fact that we're going to have a document, something tangible, and not that they can put in their door, you know, as a doorstop. We'll talk about that. But one of the things I would love to hear is with regards to reaching our own RENA allocation. And I know we want to talk about the high level and the, you know, starting our own financial institution, but sometimes it's just that bread and butter to say, okay, if we have these options for housing, and again, we talk about it, you know, when we're talking about our general plan and, you know, where we're going to prioritize for our budget through the general fund. But I think it would be also to be very interesting as we start talking about the measurable outcomes as part of the framework, really getting that down to that minutia. You know, this would help get to this type of housing that's needed, kind of what Mayor Huebner was alluding to, this, you know, this level of housing, this specific, whether it be subsidized or unsubsidized market rate. So that's one thought. And I'll pause. I don't know if you want to say anything on that one.
No, I'm taking notes, but certainly I think the comments you're making, there are things that we can work with the subcommittee for integrating into the framework. So keep going.
Cool.
And if I may I respond to one of those, Chair? Would that be all right?
Sure, please.
So just to respond to you, Mayor Sotelo Solis, I think this is why it's so important that we do these workshops with developers and the builders, because you can do everything you want at the city level, right? At the county level, but we have to rely on the private sector and the nonprofit sector to actually build this housing. So really working with them to figure out why they aren't building it or why they're not building it where it needs to be built. And that's how we can really leverage these funds. So I think it's answering that question that we need to be doing here. And so that's what, you know, the commitment you have from your staff team here to do that and bring that feedback to you so that you do get to shape the program, like you're saying, Mayor Huebner, like we have this incredible opportunity to shape a program for the San Diego region. So those are the things that I want, you know, Tweri and the team and I to work on to bring to you.
And I would say that as part of the framework, I know sometimes it's hard to hit a goal or have a number of specific housing that we want to get to. Because if we miss it, then blah. But when we're on it or above it, if we're overproducing, then I think we have an opportunity to really speak to our constituents. Yeah, no one wants to miss the mark, but I would say I would love to even have a goal. You know, we're gonna build, I don't know. I don't want to toss it out.
And just to jump in here, we know that we need to be building 12,000 units a year to keep pace. I mean, right there, there's a goal. There's a goal if we're going to try to, so that's a start. Do we want to do more than that? How are we going to achieve the RENA? Yep.
That's part of that rhythm or the cadence that we really need to get out into the community as we talk about the big 5 moves. And lastly, as we talk about housing as a whole, we know that many communities have older housing stock. So as much as I want to talk about just the new and building brand spanking new, how we invest and bring older housing up to par, whether it be lead paint, you know, infrastructure, retrofitting, and again, those historical homes that are the character of our communities, but you can't do much, you know, to the bones, but you can make sure that things don't fall over or aren't creating health hazards for those residents and future residents. Because if you are built out or you can't allocate, you know, for 500 units, it's what you have and how can you improve it. We don't want cucarachas or mold. We don't want cockroaches or, you know, and there's families right now that are enduring that. And if we have also to the the whip or the way with which our communities can enforce those elements. So as to the cadence of the 12,000 units, fabulous. But also too, if you have issues with housing, these are the entities to go to. If you want to do a home ownership, you're the homeowner and you want to do some improvements, here's where you go. So it's like all these little, if this, then this, if that, then that, and here, then there. So again, a lot of moving parts, but I think those are the things that boilerplate language we can take to our constituencies and literally say, look, check this out. We got it for you. And I think our constituencies would definitely appreciate that. So thank you again, Chair. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you. I think we have one last comment from Councilmember Shu.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few quick comments and then some suggestions or questions. One is, I know often we fall on economic models and rely on our economy and deal with economic reality, but I find that sometimes that's not always good. And then often economically driven programs fail, and partly because even though we know that economically this is feasible, and I've just read something that said this is doable. We could have much higher percentages required of developers to put in affordable housing, but they're not doing it for one reason or another. And maybe because during the economic argument, their profit margins are much higher than should be. So I think I hope we keep that in mind and not always go by an economic model that's given to us by a developer and not by those who are more objective. And obviously, churches, other organizations that do build housing or deal with housing, but have a different model altogether and answer to a different cause, obviously can do better in terms of building housing. And I think Mayor Solis brought up a good point. We shouldn't be thinking about large, huge developments all the time, as some of our commenters made. 10 units may be enough. ADUs may be enough. Granny flats are okay. In fact, the cost of those units may be less, and we should bring those into the discussion as well. And lastly, with regards to benchmarks, we do have the RENA numbers to work with, but I find those numbers often not very complete, particularly when we deal with sociological numbers and economy. So I've been told or read before that when the the cost of housing exceeds 50% of a family's income, we're starting to get into some trouble. And when you add transportation costs and that combined cost exceeds 60–70%, then it starts hurting that family in terms of their nutrition budget. These are real critical things, and we should be starting to look at those numbers and data points, maybe developing some targets or some at least a benchmark so that we can develop a goal, so that 5–10 years from now, not only do we deal with the RENA numbers, but deals with some sociological numbers, because ultimately that's what we want. We want healthy families. And we want families to have some discretionary income. We want families to be able to get where they need to go and have comfortable, safe housing. And then those numbers, benchmarks also would include, of course, the number of people that are homeless. So that's a lot, I think, for Sandag to handle and for our staff to deal with. But to me, that's the bigger picture. I think some of these numbers are already there. If we go to the other parts of government, they have a lot of those numbers. We just need to start incorporating them in these planning processes. So I hope it is easy and that we don't have to start from scratch. And we don't have to do the entire region. We can sample certain parts of the region that we know that we need to sample that is representative of the whole region. So we can be smart about how we go about this so we don't have to create a huge amount of work. Anyway, I hope those comments are helpful. I think we're we have the ability with this subcommittee to really set some real important standards and be leaders, as so many of you have already mentioned. So I hope we go forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see Mayor Huebner's hand still up. Did you have an additional comment?
I do. Thank you. I'll be very brief. Given that 3 of our 5 policy goals are preserve vulnerable housing, protect tenants, and prevent displacement, I think the comment on gentrification is extremely important in preserving the housing stock that we have, the naturally occurring affordable housing stock that we have. These are the ones that are most vulnerable to speculators knocking on their door and turning a home into an investment, which I think is a problem. And I think hopefully we can look at using some of our ideas for possible revenue opportunities to keep those actually in the affordable housing category. So maybe it would be what was it, the housing about whatever, a few of the trust fund, that's the trust fund, or also like take a look at maybe there can be some property tax breaks for the landlord so that they can upgrade a little bit yet keep the rents the same. And then maybe wouldn't that be great if we could keep those, count those into our RENA numbers, because they're vulnerable to be leaving this stock that is not being counted, that is affordable. And of course, with that, we also have to talk about all of the vacancies that are in our communities and what we can do about those as well. Those are my last comments.
Thank you. I hope Tori was taking great notes, because I thought these were just really fantastic contributions and comments from everyone on this committee. I also specifically want to uplift Mayor Todd Gloria's comments around not letting San Diego fall behind our neighbors of the north, and very much looking forward to seeing what we can do in San Diego to kind of do better, do bigger, do better, and do in a more appropriate way the kind of initiatives you had the opportunity to support when you were in the assembly, and bring that home to our region. So I'm very excited about that as well. I'm glad you are on this subcommittee and you can sort of help us navigate those difficult waters and moving
Call
that
my
forward.
old friends and tell them they have to support San Diego now.
Correct. We're going to be giving you a call list, Mayor Gloria. So with that, we'll just thank you so much for the motion, and we have a second to adopt this work plan. Can we please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Huebner.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Lawson Reamer.
Aye.
Thank you. Co-Vice Chair Moreno is absent today. Councilmember Shu.
Aye.
Thank you. And Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Hello, Solis.
Thank you. And that does pass with those members present.
Great. I think our last item is just to try to figure out when we're meeting again. And I don't think any action is required. I do think we will have an upcoming meeting probably in about a month. And staff is the plan to sort of survey folks, see when people are available and schedule something as soon as possible.
Yes, that's what we'll do. We'll be reaching out and getting some things on the calendar and then noticing it.
Okay, fantastic. I am really excited to work on this with everyone here. I'm looking forward to this being a very productive committee that gets much work done, that the ratio of work to meetings is high, lots of work in ratio to the number of meetings. So I'm just excited to do that and excited to work with you all on getting some work done for the people of San Diego County. So thank you so much.
Congratulations on a great first meeting, Chair.
Thanks.
Good job, Chair.
Adjourned.
Bye all. Thank you.